Good morning, everyone, it is good morning for some. We have a number of our guests that I certainly want to welcome from across the Pacific. But, of course, good afternoon to most of us. My name is Kent Calder, and I'm the director of the Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies here at Johns Hopkins University SAIS. Thank you for joining us in this very, very special Maritime Symposium 2024, Sea Lane Safety and Supply Chain Resilience for Economic Security. We're tremendously honored to host this event together with the Japan International Transport and Tourism Institute USA, or JITTI. Before we begin, please note that this event will be conducted in 2 languages and that we offer simultaneous translation via the headsets at your seat. And if you are going to use the headphones, the English is at channel X and the Japanese at channel XX. If you have any problems with your headset, please find a member of the staff, they're around the edges, to help you. And I do want, since this is also being broadcast to our Japanese audiences and online as well, I did want to say just a word of greeting in Japanese. Minasama, konnichiwa.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kent Calder of Reischauer Center. I'm the director of the Reischauer Center. And thank you so much for participating in your busy schedule. This event will be done in Japanese and English, and you can use simultaneous interpretation. If you would like to use, please use the headset that is at your chair. English is channel 1, Japanese is channel 2. If you need any assistance, please talk to the staff members nearby. Now, from here, we would like to start the interpretation.
Today's event timetable and speaker bios and guest surveys, I should also note, can be found through JITT's website at JITTIUSA.org. Now, with those sort of procedural matters finished, let me formally offer a warm welcome sincerely to everyone who is joining today's symposium online, here in the audience, here very close to the shadow of Capitol Hill, where, as you know, the inauguration parade for our inauguration of the president is going to be held early in January next year. We're very lucky in joining this symposium, jointly hosted, as I mentioned, by SAIS and JITTI. In opening this symposium, I did want, right at the outset, to say just a few words about my own personal mentor and the founder of the Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies here at SAIS. Our center is on the verge of its 40th anniversary. We're going to, the opening of the formal activities of the center was in 1985. So 40 years ago, we are one of the oldest centers of U.S.-Japan relations in the United States. Right from the beginning, we've had very strong ties with U.S. Embassy Tokyo. Of course, Reischauer himself, after whom our center is named, was ambassador to Japan from 1961 to 1966. A founder of our center in the 1980s, George Packard, later became Dean of SAIS Johns Hopkins as well. He was the personal assistant in Tokyo to Ambassador Reischauer. Nathaniel Thayer, who later headed the center for some time, also was the public affairs officer, Minister for Public Affairs of U.S. Embassy Tokyo when Reischauer was there. And since then, several deputy chiefs of mission, William Sherman, Russ Deming, a distinguished political minister counselor, David Scheer, who also was ambassador to Vietnam, served with us here at the embassy, and also Professor William Brooks. And myself, for 4.5 years, I served with U.S. Embassy Tokyo. So we have tried to maintain these deep relations with Japan, and in that sense, this conference is something very special to us. The subject as well of today's conference, that is to say, maritime security, and especially in the U.S.-Japan context, it's something personally very important to me. Both my father served with the U.S. Navy and retired from the Navy. My mother served during the war as in the waves, the auxiliary of the Navy. Several relatives have graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy and served in important positions, one including the commander of the U.S. West Virginia, the battleship. My own personal work relates also quite heavily to maritime issues, as of course our moderator for today's panel, a close friend, Jeffrey Gresh, also does. The issues that we focus on, of course, within maritime security, certainly the importance of the economic dimension. The seas are more than 70% of the world's surface, but 95%, as many of you know, of the internet actually flows beneath the seas, including rapidly developing services between Japan and the world, and across the Pacific and the Indian Ocean and so on in various directions. The 90% or so by volume of international trade, of course, flows across the seas, as we know. And 50% of that, more than 50% actually of that total, within the Indo-Pacific itself. Of course, the U.S.-Japan dimension, as I indicated, is a matter of tremendous importance personally to me, having served in Tokyo, having family members on both sides of the Pacific. And but it's also, from a global point of view, extremely important. We, as I think our participants and most of our audience, of course, knows, the U.S. and Japan, and this, it seems to me, is one of the strongest arguments for our cooperation, collaborate very closely in a variety of ways, but they have we have strong complementarity with one another, which is one of the greatest, most important dimensions of our cooperation. Japan's strength, for example, in shipbuilding is highly complementary with what once were strengths, but that, of course, over the years have atrophied significantly in the shipbuilding area. Another area of complementarity, of course, is shipping itself. And so the strengths of Japan in those areas can significantly complement the requirements that the United States has, which of course becomes an important argument for cooperation. The challenges, many of these, of course, will be presented by our panels, and I look forward, and the ambassador, of course, we're very lucky to have Ambassador Yamada with us. So I won't deal with those in detail, but obviously port development is one very important one. An era of rapid technological change in container shipping and changes in optimal scale of production due to automation and related security imperatives are changing the profile of what's needed in the area of ports. Shipbuilding, obviously, as I have said, China now is by far the largest shipbuilder in the world. The United States needs to expand and refurbish and increase its capabilities, and allies such as Japan are tremendously important in that regard. There are important environmental issues on the sea lanes, but most importantly, perhaps today, and I'm sure this will come out in the panel, geopolitical challenges loom large. It goes without saying, the South China Sea, the areas close to Japan itself, where Japan shares sea lanes with Korea, China, and other Indo-Pacific nations. But further afield, as we see so dramatically since the outbreak of the war in the Middle East and the Ukraine conflict as well, the Red Sea, of course, the Black Sea, these maritime issues that have global importance are becoming clearer and clearer challenges. Just as we have the challenges, and I'm only prefiguring what I know will be extremely interesting and important comments from the audience and from our panelists, the opportunities, shipbuilding, the complementarities that I mentioned, and capacity building. I was out in Palau not long ago, and I certainly saw those things. The Coast Guards of both countries and the collaboration that they are doing in the Pacific Islands, for example. Coast Guard cooperation or cooperation between both Coast Guards, and I'm sure several people will mention this, joint observer missions that the two countries are doing. So there are a range of concrete areas where we will be able to go forward further. And in conclusion, and I think this certainly will be echoed in our panels, and all of us look forward to hearing from them, international cooperation, particularly U.S.-Japan cooperation at this critical time, is absolutely vital. It makes us more than simply the sum of the two very important countries that we are. And so I look forward greatly to this discussion. We're honored now to have as our next speaker one of Japan's most distinguished former government officials a person really a visionary on issues of transportation, Masafumi Shukuri, who served as Vice Minister of the Ministry of Transportation, now the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism of Japan from 2008 to 2012. His career actually included, in addition to many distinguished positions in the ministry, also a diplomatic posting with Japan's embassy in Indonesia, as many of you know, and he's had a deep interest in Southeast Asia over the years. He's currently serving also as visiting professor of the Graduate School of Public Policy at the University of Tokyo. And he served in the past he currently serves as chairman of the International High-Speed Rail Association and also the chairman of the Japan Maritime Center. So it gives me personally, and I think it gives us all, tremendous pleasure to welcome Mr. Shukuri here, Minister Chairman Shukuri, to our conference. It's a pleasure to see you. Let's give him a hand. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Professor Kent Calder, for your warm welcome remarks. I am Masafumi Shukuri, chairman of both the JTTRI, Japan Transport and Tourism Research Institute, and the JITTI, Japan International Transport and Tourism Institute, USA. First, I would like to thank everyone who is joining our symposium today, in person or online, despite their busy schedule. Also, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to the Honorable Shigeo Yamada, Ambassador of Japan to the United States, for joining us today, despite his tight schedule serving the crucial role of maintaining US-Japan relations. Our symposium today is co-hosted by the Edwin of Reischauer Center for East Asian Studies at the Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies and the JITTI USA, which was established by the JTTRI. I would like to thank Professor Kent Calder, Director for the Reischauer Center, for his support in making this symposium held in such a successful way. Next, I'd like also to express my deepest gratitude to our two keynote speakers, Rear Admiral Anne Phillips, Administrator, Maritime Administration, Department of Transportation, and Mr. Yoshimichi Terada, Vice Minister for International Affairs, Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport and Tourism. In addition, I'd like to thank our moderator and 4 other panelists who together represent both the public and private maritime sector in both Japan and the United States. Professor Jeffrey Glesh, National Defense University, Admiral Shohei Ishii, a former Commandant, Japan Coast Guard, Rear Admiral Wei Ergin, Assistant Commandant, U.S. Coast Guard, Mr. Koichiro Hayashi, General Manager, NYK Line, Mr. Henry Nuzum, President, Waterman Logistics. In recent years, economic globalization has accelerated, increasing each nation's dependence on sea lanes, which have become a critical element for maintaining the global supply chain. However, several serious threats to the freedom of navigation in the sea lanes have emerged, such as expansive maritime claims by a certain nation in the South China Sea, the war in Ukraine causing the Black Sea to become a warlike area, tensions in the Middle East and Israel, and attacks on commercial ships by non-state actors in the Red Sea. The water shortage in the Panama Canal area has also been added to highlight such various risks, prompting countries to seek measures to secure stable sea lanes. Japan has long been described as a shimen kankai, meaning to be surrounded by the sea on all sides. Almost all of Japanese key resources, such as energy, minerals, and food, rely on international maritime transportation. Thus, the maritime industry has always been regarded as a vital component of Japan's economy. The United States has also been placing a high priority on strengthening its maritime capabilities from a security perspective. Today, the importance of sea lanes extends beyond the traditional issues of maritime transportation and maritime security. There is growing recognition of their significance widely in the content of national economic security, including issues of supply chain. In May 2022, Japan enacted the Economic Security Promotion Act, the first law to explicitly address economic security. It aims to take comprehensive measures to prevent actions that could harm the security of the nation and its citizens in the context of economic activities, with maintaining maritime and shipping sectors included as key areas. Furthermore, sea lanes with unobstructed navigation are now essential for the activities of all nations. In this sense, sea lanes are global commons shared by all. It is an urgent matter to focus on this point and to examine the roles that relevant countries must play to ensure their stability. Japan and the United States recognize the security of sea lanes as vital to national survival. Together with like-minded nations such as Australia, Europe, South Korea, and India, they strive to stabilize sea lanes through efforts including capacity building assistance for Southeast Asia and Pacific Island countries as part of the endeavor to realize rule-based, free and open Indo-Pacific. Next, I would like to highlight the importance of the supply chain in the maritime sector. The vulnerabilities in the supply chain have been underscored by various factors, including the pandemic, extreme weather events, and geopolitical risks. International tensions such as the US-China rivalry, unrest in the Middle East, the war in Ukraine, and the situation surrounding the Taiwan Strait cause disruption of navigation on major shipping routes, affecting global trade. To ensure the stable flow of goods, it is essential to secure redundant transportation routes and maintain a sufficient national shipping capacity. Strengthening the resilience of the supply chain is a critically important issue directly linked to national stability. It is essential for stakeholders in Japan and the United States to address the challenges I have just mentioned, including geopolitical risks. Collaborative efforts by Japan and the United States in tackling these issues are expected to greatly contribute to the stability of the global supply chain. The last but very indispensable point is that from the perspective of economic security, the great significance of such securing sea lanes, stable maritime activities, and resilient supply chain is not yet widely recognized by the public level in Japan. I feel there is a strong need to raise public awareness on these issues. At today's symposium, we have invited senior government officials and corporate executives from Japan and the United States to discuss the challenges and risks facing both countries and industries, as I have just mentioned. We also aim to explore ways to enhance collaboration between the two nations and to consider these issues together with all of you. Finally, I hope that today's symposium will contribute to solving the challenges related to maritime activities and sea lanes, which are fundamental to supporting the economic, social, and defense activities of both Japan and the United States. I also hope that it will lead to further development of Japan-US relations. With these wishes, I conclude my remarks. Thank you very much for your kind attention and participation today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shukuri. Next, we're honored to have a special guest of honor. Please welcome Ambassador Shigeo Yamada, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Japan to the United States.
Good afternoon. And thank you, Professor Calder and Mr. Shukuri, for your remarks, as well as thank you for bringing us together here at SAIS for this very important maritime symposium. As Japan's ambassador to the United States, I am reminded every day that our strong bilateral relationship is built on the solid foundation created by various non-governmental players in business, culture, and academia. Both JITTI and the Reischauer Center at SAIS have long been leaders in this regard, and I am grateful for all that you do. We all recognize the critical role of the sea in the security and prosperity of our countries. Japan is an island nation. We rely on international maritime transport to import and export vital goods such as energy and food. Last year alone, Japan's seaborne trade volume approached 800 million metric tons, and more than 80% of the volume of international trade in goods travel by sea. That means the strength of global supply chains depend on the reliability of sea lanes. But as we look around the world, that reliability is at risk. We see environmental risks such as devastating water shortages, as in the Panama Canal. We are also facing growing threats of regional security situation affecting the international trade. We live in a world where problems anywhere can easily morph into problem everywhere. We saw it in the Black Sea, and we saw it in the Red Sea. Meanwhile, in Asia, we remain on guard against unilateral attempts to change the status quo by force or coercion in the East China Sea and South China Sea. The challenges we face are real, but so are the opportunities for partnership. The timing of this symposium is very fitting. Japan and the United States must continue our leadership in securing sea lanes of communication. And we need to continue strengthening our cooperation with other like-minded countries. At the recent Quad leaders meeting, our two countries, along with Australia and India, announced our joint commitment to strengthening maritime security and ensuring a free and open Indo-Pacific. These efforts include a new regional training initiative to enable our partners in the region to monitor and secure their waters. And next year, the Quad countries will launch a first-ever Quad at Sea ship observer mission to improve interoperability and advance maritime security. Our shared commitment to maritime security enhances international connectivity, strengthens the global supply chain, and contributes to sustainable development and shared prosperity. This year marks the 170th anniversary of the Treaty of Peace and Amity between Japan and the United States, when Japan opened Shimoda and Hakodate and began to connect with the world. And 170 years later, today, the alliance between Japan and the United States have never been stronger. Our bilateral relationship has evolved into a truly global partnership. Together, we are working to uphold and strengthen a free and open international order based on the rule of law. So I'm grateful to all of you for the role you play in this effort. So finally, I would like to wish you all a productive and engagement symposium today. So thank you very much.
I know that we've all appreciated the remarks of Ambassador Yamada, who's done a wonderful job here representing Japan. We're moving now to our keynote speakers and panels. The symposium consists of opportunities to hear from both experts and government officials, as those of you who have taken a look at the program know, in the form of both keynote speeches and then two panel discussions moderated by Professor Jeffrey Gresh from the National Defense University. Our first keynote speaker, whom we are really privileged to have with us, is Ms. Ann Phillips, who's currently serving as the administrator of the Department of Transportation's Maritime Administrations. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honored to be here to join you all and very grateful to JTTRI for inviting me and to the Edwin O. Reischauer Center for hosting this exceptional event. A special thank you to Ambassador Yamada for his remarks, to Vice Minister Terada, to Chairman Shukuri. Sir, thank you very much for inviting me again, and to Director Shashida, who are joining us all today. It's an honor to speak at this 2024 Symposium on Economic Security related to sea lane safety, and certainly the theme of sea lane safety and supply chain resilience for economic security is most relevant as we consider the current geopolitical environment and the many challenges that have been mentioned already this afternoon. We value this opportunity to address the challenges and opportunities in ensuring safety of our sea lanes, which are so crucial to both of our national and global economies. Indeed, sea lanes in the Indo-Pacific serve as arteries of global commerce, responsible for the movement of over 50% of the world's shipping tonnage. They connect nations and deliver goods to ensure our economies thrive. For Japan, an island nation that relies on maritime transport for virtually all of its trade volume, interestingly, much like the US, the safety and security of these sea lanes are paramount. At MARAD, at the Maritime Administration, our focus is the promotion and development of the U.S. maritime industry to ensure our nation's economic and national security needs are met. In the United States, the Maritime Administration, the Federal Maritime Commission, and the U.S. Coast Guard, and other federal agencies are similarly focused on enhancing both our economic and national security to ensure our maritime industry is productive, but from different perspectives. However, international sea lanes, so crucial to global trade and economic stability, are increasingly under threat, as evidenced by the ongoing worldwide security challenges we have mentioned today. I would like to talk first about safety and resilience of our most important resource, that of our people, our mariners, and our maritime workforce. Both Japan and the U.S. face the issue of an aging maritime workforce, and we struggle to attract and retain younger mariners. At MARAD, we do not regulate, but we do convene. And after convening a summit on mariner workforce development in September of 2022, we derived 4 key pillars to focus on the growth of our industry: to recruit, train, retain, and reduce barriers to entry. Based on reports of various very serious incidents of bullying, harassment, and sexual harassment, and even assault at sea, we have taken action through innovative programs like the Embark, Every Mariner Builds a Respectful Culture program. Established in December of 2021, this program provides a sexual assault prevention and response program for the maritime industry and is designed to ensure a safe and respectful work environment for mariners, particularly for cadets participating in Sea Year programs at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. Embark became law in 2023. It aligns with additional requirements for the safety of mariners at sea in the Coast Guard Act of the same year. You may hear some of that from Rear Admiral Wayne Arguin, with whom we partner very closely on these initiatives. Under this standard, U.S. flag, privately owned, commercially operating vessels and vessel operators in international trade must comply with specific policies and procedures before they may host cadets from the Merchant Marine Academy or state academies. And they must host those cadets by law to be a part of some of our programs, which I will speak about momentarily. Ultimately, the program improves life at sea for all mariners, driving a long-needed culture change across the industry and helping to attract and retain a more diverse pool of talent to ensure an adequate mariner workforce. This work, coupled with the more recent convening this year on mariner work-life balance, continues our focus on building a stronger, sustainable workforce for our future. As we look to build resilience in our industry and our supply chain, it is equally vital to ensure that they remain resilient in the face of global challenges. Our people are a part of this. They are an essential part. As we all saw firsthand during COVID how fragile these supply chains can be, we learned many lessons the hard way. For countries like the U.S. and Japan, our economies, again, depend heavily on exports and imports delivered at sea. We learned from the pandemic that we need to build capacity and resilience into our supply chain processes broadly. At MARAD, under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the U.S. invested an unprecedented under the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, the U.S. invested an unprecedented $1 trillion in our nation's infrastructure. $17 billion of that is involved in grant opportunities that may support port infrastructure. $2.25 billion of that is invested in the Maritime Administration across 5 years, dedicated to port infrastructure development. This is the 4th year of that program. So far, we have awarded nearly $2 billion in appropriations, grants, across the nation and its territories for port infrastructure. These grants are providing a generational opportunity for change to strengthen our supply chain reliability, where items enter and leave our nation, to expand our global commerce. Another MARAD funding program, the U.S. Marine Highway Program, invests in our nation's inland and coastal waterways. Between 2010, when the program was created, and 2023, we've invested $103 million across grants eligible for this particular program. We've also recognized the need to revitalize our commercial fleet. Our voluntary intermodal sea lift agreement and maritime security programs are the cornerstone of commercial sea lift and have been for us in international trade for 3 decades. Specifically, the Maritime Security Program, and you may hear more about that later today, supports 60 commercially viable dry bulk, container, and roll-on, roll-off vessels under U.S. flag in international trade. We also recently launched a similar tanker security program that now supports 10 commercially viable tankers, and we have an authority to move to 20, which we hope will be appropriated in the future. In all, including these vessels and others under U.S. flag, our commercial fleet of large ocean-going merchant vessels in international trade stands at 94. That will stun you with the modest nature of the number. It is a far cry from where we need to be, but at still higher numbers than we have seen in a decade. We have a long way to go. To safeguard our economic security, the U.S. and Japan have committed to enhancing the resilience of maritime supply chains, and in a recent summit reaffirmed our shared vision for a free and open Indo-Pacific and established frameworks for stronger cooperation on supply chain resilience, maritime cybersecurity, and the use of clean energy in shipping. As we transition to renewable energy resources, vessels critical to offshore wind are of particular interest to us. And so within MARAD, we have an opportunity to designate such vessels as vessels of national interest. That gives us an opportunity for those companies seeking to leverage financing from our loan guarantee program known as Title 11 to specifically focus on building these vessels. This also helps us simultaneously strengthen our internal shipbuilding industry while advancing clean energy goals. The U.S. and Japan, along with other allies in the Indo-Pacific region, are working to build a more resilient supply chain. And recently, the established Supply Chain Center, a Department of Commerce and International Trade Administration effort, is one example of this commitment. Our shared vision, reaffirmed during the Japan-U.S. Summit and G7 Ministers' Declaration earlier this year, is clear. A free and open Indo-Pacific relies on a secure and stable sea lane. As we focus on the resilience of supply chains, it's crucial to address another global challenge, climate change, and the need to reduce carbon emissions. As our economies work together, we are both committed to reducing greenhouse gas emissions from ships and port operations. I know we are collaborating on green shipping technology and green shipping corridors, including hydrogen and ammonia-fueled vessel opportunities and refueling opportunities. Through our marine highway and port infrastructure development programs, our ports are being upgraded through a focus on electrification and other means to reduce emissions and use renewable energy. Greener ports will improve environmental sustainability, but also create economic opportunities and build resilience. Finally, as we work to reduce carbon emissions, we also hold a particular interest in maritime safety at sea. Under our broader maritime transportation system, I'd like to talk about a program we are spearheading, SAFE Maritime Transportation System, which is a confidential near-miss reporting system for the U.S. maritime industry. You might ask yourself why this is new or novel. It is commonly done in aviation. But indeed, there has been no coherent system across industry from the commercial perspective that reported near-miss opportunities in a confidential way so that all across industry could learn from these examples. We have a collection of data that we have been working on with voluntarily from industry partners to be analyzed, assessed, and to help us identify critical safety-related trends that can prevent incidents in the future. We've completed a pilot project with a number of participating companies and are now expanding the program, which we hope to build to improve safety broadly across our industry. Also, from a context of maritime security, as we work to improve safety, we must deal with the expansion of security threats. They contribute to worldwide volatility in many of the places that have already been mentioned: Ukraine, South China Sea, Houthi attacks in the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden. For both the United States and Japan, security of sea lanes is not only a matter of economic importance, it is a matter of national survival. Our collaboration through multilateral initiatives, including the Free and Open Indo-Pacific Strategy and joint capacity building exercises with the Quad nations, will help us ensure these critical maritime corridors are open, safe, and secure. Before I conclude, I would like to propose a challenge as we talk through our panels here today. As industry leaders, policymakers, and experts, how can we best collectively leverage technical innovations to build and enhance safety and security of our sea lanes and build a sustainable and reliant maritime industry for our future? We'll think about the steps we can achieve together to take these goals, and I look forward to hearing your ideas during our discussions. Thank you again. In closing, I would like to emphasize the safety and stability of our industry is more important than the responsibility of any one nation. It will require ongoing teamwork, collaboration, and innovation, and a shared commitment to the principles of security, transparency, and respect for international law. We can work together to safeguard our sea lanes, build resilient supply chains, and ensure economic security for generations to come. Thank you, and I look forward to our very important conversations today.
Thank you sincerely, Administrator Phillips. Our next speaker today is Mr. Yoshimichi Terada, who's currently serving as Vice Minister for International Affairs at the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism of Japan. Please welcome me in welcoming Mr. Terada to the stage. Thank you.
For those who are just entering the room and would like access to our simultaneous interpreted languages, English is on channel 1 and Japanese is on channel 2. Thank you.
Good afternoon. こんにちは。
Hello. I am very grateful for being given this kind of opportunity to speak. Professor Calder, Professor Gresh, Rear Admiral Argan, Ambassador Yamada, Chairman Shukuri, and all the U.S. and Japanese participants, I am sincerely thank you for the opportunity to present today. As you are well aware, securing sea lanes and strengthening supply chains have been issues for a long time. However, while these issues have been understood to be important, for a long time they have not always been addressed in a truly necessary manner. With the recent events that have undermined sea lanes and supply chains, I feel that there really is finally a common understanding that mere optimism is not sufficient and that a more effective response is needed. In Japan as well, various systems related to economic security have been put in place over the past few years. However, I believe that further study is necessary. So the timing of this symposium is timely for both countries, and I hope that this will provide a great opportunity for Japan and U.S. cooperation in this area. First, I would like to review the significance of sea lanes and the supply chains. It is extremely important for the peace and security of countries around the world to strengthen a maritime order and ensure freedom of navigation and safety. Additionally, as risks surrounding the global economy diversify, we believe that building a supply chain that emphasizes sustainability is the key to making the supply chain more resilient, so that it can flexibly respond to various changes in circumstances, including contingencies, in order to continue production and transportation. This is a global map that I'm showing here. Japan relies on imports for almost all of its crude oil, and its dependence on in the Middle East accounts for about 95%. Ensuring stable transportation and safety at choke points such as the Strait of Hormuz and the Malacca and Singapore Strait is a top priority. There is a greater variety of risks to supply chains and sea lanes compared to before. I believe there are 4 of them. First is the geopolitical risk. As you all know, situation in the East Asia region is unpredictable. And in the Middle East, the situation is truly serious. The Red Sea is being constantly attacked by the Houthis, and navigation of the Red Sea has become impossible. In particular, the Galaxy Leader, operated by NYK, a Japanese shipping company, has been captured along with its crew and has yet to be released. We are resolutely protesting and demanding the immediate release and cessation of such attacks. The Russian-Ukrainian conflict not only made navigation of the Black Sea difficult, but also has heightened. There is also a heightened risk of the piracy activities as well. Next is the climate change and natural disaster risk. Since last year, the Panama Canal has been in drought due to low rainfall, limiting the number of vessels to about 2/3 of normal operations at some point. And Japan also has been affected by typhoons and earthquakes. The third is the pandemic risk. During the global spread of the novel coronavirus, disruptions in maritime transportation stemming from congestion in ports and land transportation had a global impact. Japan also have come up with many countermeasures. However, it only highlighted the vulnerability of supply chains. The fourth is cybersecurity. Last year in Japan, a cyber attack caused a system failure at the port of Nagoya, resulting in a loss of port functions for approximately 3 days. The port of Nagoya is the most advanced port in terms of IT due to its integrated management, but the risks associated with this have become apparent. In addition, given the broad deployment of shipping information platforms that contribute to the digital transformation of logistics and the use of open networks, we need to be more vigilant about cyber risks. Here is an overview of the current state of the Japanese maritime industry. In Japan, there is a cluster of diverse industries known as the Maritime Cluster. Various peripheral industries have developed, including shipping, shipbuilding, as well as finance, insurance, and trading. Japanese shipping and shipbuilding remain a global force. However, in recent years, as for the Japanese merchant fleet, the Japanese flag vessels account for 10%. And now, next, I would like to introduce some initiatives in Japan's maritime industry. First is the shipbuilding sector. Japan has set a goal of securing the top share of orders for next generation fuels by 2030 by responding quickly. For next generation ships by 2030 by responding quickly to next generation fuels in order to continue to lead the world shipbuilding industry. Last year, a goal of zero GHG emissions by 2050 was agreed upon at the IMO. Japan has been proactive in proposing to the IMO a system design that combines fuel regulations and incentives. Next, in the shipping sector, we provide support to ship owners as well as shipping companies to encourage stable ship ownership. Japan's tonnage standard tax system encourages shipping companies to secure Japanese flag vessels and crews. So, back in 2007, the Japanese flag vessels was 92. But in 2023, that number has grown to 311. Next is about Japanese ports. The international logistics between North America and Asia is a major artery of the global economy, but there are concerns about geopolitical risks. The international logistics system is built on the basis of economic rationality. However, we do need to take into account the geopolitical risk as well, and that there is a need to strengthen our nation's port functions. Discussions are also underway in terms of the green shipping corridor. This is being spoke about in the Quad to introduce this corridor and others. and we would like to move forward in cooperation with other countries. Additionally, I would like to say a few words about the role of a country's Coast Guard. I'd like to see former Commandant Ishii is here, but I would like to make a few words. The Japan Coast Guard conducts cooperation, capacity building, support, and others. At the Quad Summit in September this year, the leaders agreed to launch the Quad at Sea Ship Observer mission among Japan, US, Australia, and India. With regard to counter-piracy, for example, in the Gulf of Aden, off the coast of Somalia, Japan Coast Guard officers accompanied the dispatch of Maritime Self-Defense Force escort vessels. Next, I would like to talk about the supply chain strengthening and how to strengthen the sea lane. First, as for the peacetime preparedness, I believe there are three things we can do. First, we need to create a common international awareness that the resilience of supply chains is a common global interest. And we do need to keep a close eye on the supply situation of infrastructure for geopolitical risks. Additionally, we need to bring resiliency in supply chains so that alternative networks can be built within the economic mechanism. In times of contingency, in addition to ensuring the safety of sea lanes, transportation resources at the minimum level must be made available. Regarding vessels and ports, I believe that a certain amount of leeway is needed in infrastructure, and that sharing and coordination among authorities and companies should be promoted from peacetime while taking market conditions into consideration. And not just your own country's vessels or seafarers, we must secure various vessels to have a good balance in the ship's registry. And also, the shipbuilding industry should strategically secure resources, and attention should be made to its role as a foundation for ship repair as well as for its dealing with next generation of vessels. It is also important to discuss international cooperation and role sharing, and this is something that I just heard today already. And this is something, just as a reference, I would like to talk about. This is in regards to the Malacca-Singapore Strait and Japan's effort in this. As a major user of the strait, Japan has provided support and cooperation to the three in this area, And then currently, due to the fact that there are many more or diversification of the user countries, a cooperation mechanism was established in 2007 in order to promote this together with coastal countries and other countries. We believe such multilateral efforts can be a good example for other choke points in this world. Finally, I would like to introduce some implications for Japan-U.S. cooperation with regard to supply chain resilience and securing sea lanes. First, bearing in mind the potentially important role of the Japan-U.S. shipping route, we believe that industry, government, and academia in both countries need to work together to share and develop policies and knowledge. Second, it is important to increase the interest and commitment of European countries toward Asia. And we believe it is desirable for Japan and the U.S. to cooperate in this effort. Third, I would like to emphasize that shared values through the realization of a free and open Asia-Pacific will contribute to the strengthening of supply chains and the stability of sea lanes. In the end, I would like to conclude my presentation by saying that my belief is that it is essential for Japan and the United States to cooperate with each other based on the alliance and to involve many other countries concerned, along with like-minded countries. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you sincerely, Vice Minister Terada. Now, I would kindly like to ask the moderator for our panel what I think will be some very interesting discussion of both what we've heard and some new ideas. Our moderator, Dr. Jeffrey Gresh, and also the panelists of our first panel, Admiral Shohei Ishii, and also Rear Admiral Wayne Aguin Jr., if they could make their way to this stage. Thank you very much. This will deal with current security situation on the sea lanes.
Wonderful. Well, thanks very much for the introductory remarks, for the opportunity to be here, JITTI and the Reischauer Center. It's a real honor to be able to moderate this first panel. We have two distinguished guests today, Admiral Shohei Ishii, the former Commandant of the Japan Coast Guard, and Rear Admiral Wayne Arguin, the Assistant Commandant for Prevention Policy at the U.S. Coast Guard. The way we'll proceed is each of them will provide around 5-minute remarks, and then I have a series of questions. Some were already planted ahead of time upon registration, and then if there's time, we'll open it up, but unfortunately, that might not be likely at this point, just so we can try to remain on schedule. So with that being said, Admiral Ishii, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Gresh. My name is Shohei Ishii. I was Commandant of the Japan Coast Guard until this July. First of all, I would like to express my deepest condolences for the enormous loss and damage caused by Hurricane Helen. Also, I would like to pay my utmost respect for all those who have been engaged in life-saving and recovery efforts under extremely difficult circumstances, including the U.S. Coast Guard. It's a great honor for me to invite to such a timely and therefore significant symposium. Perhaps you expect the Coast Guard to play an important role in ensuring the safety of sea lanes. So first, I would like to introduce the Japan Coast Guard's efforts for international cooperation. The Japan Coast Guard was established in 1948, shortly after World War II. It was modeled after and advised by the U.S. Coast Guard, which has a wide range of missions, including maritime security, maritime rescue, environmental protection, disaster relief, and traffic safety. On the other hand, unlike the USCG, the JCG is a non-military law enforcement agency and does not have a military mission. Japan is surrounded by the sea on all sides, and in terms of maritime area, which combines territorial waters and EEZs. Japan ranks 6th in the world, since it shares maritime borders with its neighbors. The security of its territorial waters is also JCG's important mission. Especially in recent years, the China Coast Guard's intrusion of the Japanese territorial waters around the Senkaku Islands has become a regular occurrence. In response, the Japanese government has strengthened its maritime security capabilities, including increasing the JCG's vessels and aircrafts. The Japan Coast Guard is promoting international cooperation among other Coast Guard agencies to realize a free and open Indo-Pacific. As for bilateral frameworks, the U.S. Coast Guard has been and continues to be a key partner, a memorandum of understanding was expanded in 2022. As for multilateral frameworks, the JCG has established all of these worldwide or regional forums, which are Coast Guard Global Summit, North Pacific Coast Guard Forum, and Heads of Asian Coast Guard Agency meeting. The JCG would like to continue to actively commit to these international contributions. In the fight against piracy since 2009, Japan has dispatched self-defense forces vessels with JCG law enforcement officials on board to the waters off the coast of Somalia and the Gulf of Aden, which are major shipping lanes from Europe to Japan. Also, the JCG has sent vessels and aircraft to the countries in the Indo-Pacific to conduct maritime patrols and enhance its presence in the region. In addition, the JCG has contributed its staff to the RECAP ISC, an international organization for counter-piracy in Asia. In terms of capacity building assistance for other Coast Guard agencies, the JCG launched the Mobile Cooperation Team in 2017. Currently, the team has 18 members and provides capacity building assistance to countries in the Indo-Pacific region, especially in Southeast Asia. The total number of dispatch so far expands 100. Also this year, the JCG started a full-scale effort in the Micronesian nations, which are Palau, Federal States of Micronesia, and the Republic of the Marshall Islands, in cooperation with the US and Australia. Lastly, in recent years, new multilateral frameworks have been established to promote a maritime order based on the rule of law. Various cooperative efforts are already underway in US, Japan, Philippines, US, Japan, ROK, and Quad. The JCG will commit to cooperation efforts through these frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vice Admiral Arguin, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Dresch and Admiral Ishii, and distinguished friends and partners. Thank you for the opportunity to represent Coast Guard interests in this very important symposium. Many people don't know that the U.S. Coast Guard is a global Coast Guard. We've operated in every ocean, every sea for a number of years, and continue to expand our footprint principally within the Indo-Pacific of late. And it's important to sort of paint a picture of the cooperation that we maintain with the Japan Coast Guard, but with other partners within the region as well. When I think about supply chain fragility, I always come back to what we describe as the triple challenge. Ships are getting larger, they're becoming more complex. Everybody wants more of the things that we buy, and that puts increasing pressure on a supply chain that is arguably relatively fragile. There's a number of things that can cause any number of disruptions within the supply chain, and sea lane security is probably one of those most essential elements of the entire supply chain that must be predictable so that industries can identify where they're going to be able to move their cargoes effectively and safely. That supply chain fragility you've heard about across the board. Each one of the speakers talked about all of the different things that could influence a disruption in supply chains, geopolitics, the interconnectedness, cyber, as things become more and more complex, mariner shortages, and the stability of those sea lanes are all things that could at any given moment cause a disruption in supply chain that will negatively influence economic prosperity and national security. The Coast Guard's role in the Indo-Pacific is to continue to strengthen those partnerships through training, through joint operations, and through an enduring presence. We continue to push our Coast Guard cutters and our teams, mobile training teams, into the region to provide shared interest to expand those partnerships, to share information, and ensure that each of our unique capabilities provide for an expanded force multiplier to demonstrate rules-based order, to reinforce norms from an international perspective, and ensure that the mariners that go to sea are able to do so safely, securely, and be able to get home to their families while performing that mission. And freedom of navigation is, in fact, an essential element of any shipping industry. Without the predictability of having freedom of navigation, the ability for shippers to determine when they're going to be able to deliver a cargo, how they're going to be able to deliver that cargo, it falls off the table pretty quickly. We strive from a U.S. Coast Guard perspective to maintain being that partner of choice, looking for opportunities to share our lessons learned, to expand maritime domain awareness so that we can be that force multiplier in a vast region, and so that those partner nations are able to defend their own economic security, to evaluate their ability to expand partnerships not only with the U.S., but with other like-minded nations. Maritime governance, at its essence, is a country's ability to defend its own economic potential, to be able to ensure that each of those opportunities are expanded, and when individuals don't choose to follow those international norms, that there is accountability. And that really is the essence of maritime governance, demonstrating a predictable, reliable way to ensure that what happens on the seas are understood, safe, and secure. I mentioned information sharing. At the end of the day, if we can expand the opportunities for individuals and individual countries to understand where their threats are, we can make better choices about where ships should go, what we can be doing to ensure that those ships can enter those areas safely, and then ensure that, that national economies and international commerce can be done from a safe and secure perspective, and also ensuring that those mariners that go to sea are able to do so safely and securely. So thank you.
Thanks very much. So perhaps I'll open up with 2 points that both of you mentioned, and perhaps could have you kind of drill down into this idea. And I appreciated the slide, Admiral Ishii, and certainly the mention, Vice Admiral Agin, related to the MCTs. But I wonder if each of you could speak more to, you know, one critical element, as you both mentioned, is capacity building measures. So I'd be curious to hear a little bit more about some of the vision and also current activities, whether it's in Southeast Asia, but also in the Indian Ocean as well, in terms of what the U.S. Coast Guard is doing and the Japan Coast Guard is doing in both those realms. Admiral Ishii.
Yes. Well, first of all, in terms of the coastal nations, the capacity buildings in these nations, thus far, the Japan Coast Guard have been supporting in various ways of these coastal nations in terms of capacity building. That being said, the vision itself really was based on the individual nation. There was no overarching vision per se. However, recently, with the free and open Indo-Pacific concept between the U.S. and Japan, this notion has become really important. So, based on that, to provide the support based on this notion is something that we have been able to do. And I just as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, this was something that started between two countries. Then it expanded to multilateral, and then there will be more like a mini-lateral fashion. And I mentioned earlier Philippines, South Korea, and other countries where we have been able to provide a cooperation in these coastal nations.
Very much.
So maybe I'll provide a little different sort of perspective. From the Coast Guard's perspective, our international affairs team really looks to partner with nations and try to meet them where they are. Rather than coming in and saying, here's what you ought to do, we come in and ask, what do you need? What is it that you need from us or that we can provide to you that would help support you reinforcing, strengthening your own ability to defend your own exclusive economic zone, to enhance your maritime governance? We can provide a variety of different training opportunities that can be how you can or train folks to take care of their engines, for example, or how to perform a law enforcement boarding. We've provided legal teams that can come in and help reinforce the legal frameworks that would hold individuals accountable when they breach those international norms. So there's a variety of different tools that are available, and it's not just from the U.S. or U.S. government, U.S. Coast Guard. It's relying on those partners and being able to take advantage of each of our strengths and be able to learn from each other, pass on best practices, and then understand where you need to be, what you're interested in, and then be able to provide that as a supplementing force package.
So I'm wondering if both of you, in that regard, the training programs, these initiatives, meeting countries where they're at with their capabilities and the like, what are some of the challenges that you've faced when trying to implement some of these various capacity building measures?
Thank you. In terms of the Southeast Asia capacity building, we really have been focusing our efforts in this area. But for instance, in the Philippines, towards Philippines, we really have been focusing a lot on this country, but also to other countries. There is some variety in terms of how much work we have put into. So I believe that perhaps more of a universal support might need to be taken or provided. But in terms of meeting where they're at, I think this is really important. But perhaps we also need to meet where they are in terms of their level. I'm trying to find a really sensitive way to say this, but perhaps there are certain nations that are not quite at the global standard level yet, but we would like to help them so that they can reach a higher level that can meet the global standard. And additionally, for Japan, just as I mentioned earlier, Southeast Asia countries were our focus in terms of our support, but also in the South Asia, and just as I mentioned earlier, and also Pacific Island nations are the areas that we are expanding our support to, because these are the important areas in terms of sea lane security. So I believe that there are more efforts that need to be provided here.
So maybe a couple of things. One, on the information sharing front, being able to share certain levels of information may not be easily done, not necessarily from a language barrier, but from a capabilities perspective. Being able to push information in real time that can be useful for operational decision making. The capabilities within a particular nation may not be where our technology is, and trying to find a creative solution to ensure that information is deliberate, it is used for tactical purposes. It has been a challenge. I would say capabilities across the board. Some nations may not have, to the Admiral's point, may not have access to surface assets and a workforce that is capable of doing some of the things to protect their own interests, and being able to build that capacity quickly, it can be a challenge. And then just maybe a little bit selfishly from a Coast Guard, we're a small service. And I have not run into a single engagement where somebody said we don't need any more Coast Guard. There's always a demand signal, and so trying to provide the right capabilities and skill sets from our own workforce for a growing demand continues to pressurize our ability to deliver that service.
So I'm curious, actually, that sort of raises issue, which we haven't talked a lot about, is port security. Because both of you, both services, the JCG, the U.S. Coast Guard is heavily involved in an important component of that. I wonder if you could each comment on what you're doing in that regard, especially when it comes to allies and partners.
So I can start that one, sir. So I have a full team of international port security assessors that follow the rules and norms established by the International Maritime Organization under the ISPIS program. And so we provide teams that will do reciprocal visits going into our trading partners to ensure that those countries are in fact meeting the international standard. And then we do reciprocal visits. So we bring that same country over to the United States and then show them how we protect our own ports. And that's a great opportunity to share best practices across the board. And there's an incentive to do that. If you aren't implementing the international norms, then there are restrictions that are placed on you to be able to trade in the United States. And so there's incentive to understand that. And so being able to do that sort of not only capacity building, but checks and balances, meeting international standards is something that I've got an entire team that focuses on.
Thank you very much. Partnership and also cooperation among countries is definitely important. And then when it comes to protection of ports and also security of ports, is definitely we need to think about international standards. So for example, the IMO has been working on this regard. Japan, MLIT, and also JCG have been the stakeholders in this one. So everyone brings specialized knowledge, and also we work together with other countries to establish and also maintain standards. So that is the part of international cooperation. So of course we need to implement them correctly as well.
Fair enough. Speaking of the collaboration, I wonder if both of you could now speak to, certainly the U.S.-Japan alliance is so critical and valuable, perhaps, coming to new and heightened levels. What's going on at the bilateral level between the United States Coast Guard and the Japanese Coast Guard? What are some of the initiatives that are ongoing that you could kind of speak to? But I guess furthermore, looking out to the future, what is your hope and desire to see the two forces doing more of in a combined and joint manner?
Well, I think arguably more of the same, but just more of it. I think we have, I wouldn't say that we've exhausted every possible opportunity to strengthen partnerships and to look for different ways to enhance maritime security. I think one place that is probably going to be emerging will be cybersecurity, understanding how best to address cybersecurity and the impacts. A cyber incident, unlike maybe a more traditional maritime casualty, will have cascading effects that will wrap around the world potentially in seconds. And that's an impact that could have global supply chain impacts if we aren't establishing a regularly elevated level of protection of our networks and of our systems, especially as ships become more interconnected, more connected to shoreside, more relying on technology. The ability to disrupt that technology is something that we need to be heightened and focused on.
Regarding cooperation between the United States and also Japan in terms of Coast Guard, so of course we'd like to do more. I mentioned this during my presentation. U.S. and Japanese Coast Guards definitely established with the aspect of the same model, and so the Japanese Coast Guard has been working on catching up with the U.S. Coast Guard. So I think we've come to a point that we are now shoulder to shoulder with the United States Coast Guard colleagues. So it is such an honor that we have been working together with the United States. And then also Coast Guard between the United States and then also U.S. and Japan. So we do have a MOU. This was signed in 2010. So I mentioned that this has been revised and also expanded in 2022. So based on that MOU, we have been working on bilateral cooperation. There are so many initiatives in that. So not just in the United States and Japan, we do have a unilateral cooperation. So we have involved South Korea. And so we'd like to expand this kind of regard a little bit much more. So we mentioned the Quad and also India. So India is going to be a big stakeholder in our cooperation in the future. And so what we have been doing is that, of course, cyber, you mentioned that earlier. MDA is also an important topic. So we collect information and we share that with Coast Guard agencies. This is really important to have this for the security of sea lanes. When it comes to maritime security and also safety, so we do have to think about the military aspect of it, but as a law enforcement agency, I think that we have an enlarged role in this regard. So of course, we'd like to continue working together with the U.S. Coast Guard, and then also we'd like to be the leaders of international cooperation.
You mentioned at the end the military, which kind of brings up another question, which I'd like to ask is, in one of the things I've sort of come across, and I understand it's a sensitive topic to say the least, in that the Japan Coast Guard is a law enforcement agency. But I'm curious, especially one of the things in the United States, Department of Defense, we promote and push jointness between all the different forces. In a given warfight or given scenario, the forces can come together in kind of a joint command and control structure. I'm curious to hear, and perhaps on the U.S. Coast Guard side too, about the possibility or what's being done to kind of promote the increase and improvement or enhancement of the relationship between the Japan Maritime Self-Defense Forces and that of the Japan Coast Guard. But also on the U.S. side, what the U.S. Coast Guard is doing in conjunction with the Navy, especially in East Asia, in conjunction with those forces as well.
So from a Coast Guard perspective, I have to say this. We are the hard nucleus about which the Navy forms in times of war. And we have a long-standing relationship with our DoD partners. We speak, we call it speaking purple, right? We can speak both from an industry perspective, but we can also speak through sort of the DoD lens. And so that's a unique role that we play. We can sort of keep both feet in both camps. And I think that's a place where we can assist Japan Coast Guard with how do you navigate that, because it can get a little bit challenging, especially, and at least from my perspective, there are real reasons to keep the Coast Guard doing Coast Guard stuff and real reasons to let the Navy do Navy stuff. But there's some seams there that we've got to be able to communicate, especially in a contested environment. And so we are working that not only within the U.S., but then also how do you operate jointly with international partners? And so continuing to move the needle on that is an area where we'll continue to work.
Thank you, Japanese Coast Guard. So I mentioned this during my presentation. So we are a non-military organization. That is our most unique factor. And because this has been established after the end of World War II, and then of course that we are in an era that we cannot just make that distinction and then not touch on military aspects of our risks. And then so there are many risks that might disrupt our environment. And then so we don't say the Japanese Navy, well, we say that Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. So we have been we have been working together with them, and then so this started in 1999 and also 2000. So we have been working together with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force, and then we have collaborated with the Japanese Maritime Defense Force regarding counter-piracy. And then also when we look at the Senkaku Islands, the Japanese Coast Guard is at the forefront, but at the same time, we need to have that partnership with the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. So this already has been established. And also collaboration and also cooperation were not really that important in the past, but this situation has changed. So our partnership is definitely seamless now. So in terms of control and command, there is a language in the Japanese Self-Defense Force Act of the Japanese government that the defense minister can certify contingency that can mobilize certain functions of ours as well.
Therefore, the cooperation in terms of information sharing really is extremely important for us.
Wonderful. Thanks very much. We have just a couple of minutes remaining. I have some questions that we received upon registration that I'll ask those to the panelists. First, to Admiral Ishii, what were the 2 or 3 most significant events in international relations during your assignment as Commandant or Vice Commandant?
Hi.
Yes, I would like to mention 2 things. One is, as I mentioned earlier, the U.S. and Japan Coast Guard cooperation. Just as I mentioned in my presentation, there was a memorandum of understanding in 2020, and then it was revised. And a lot of activities happened because of this. So we were a lot of cooperation from bilateral and unilateral, and we were able to further expand that. The other one is the international initiatives, the resumption of it. COVID has disrupted, however, it was really a big damage. But in Asia and North Asia, there was a ministerial meetings that happened, and then also last year there was a Tokyo's ministerial meeting, and then also there was other Coast Guard leaders that meetings took place. So these are really good progress that I believe.
Fantastic. And then the last question is to both of you, actually, and it's what kind of actions and moves are expected to achieve rule of law in the Pacific Ocean?
I would simply define that as, a shared commitment to upholding rules-based order, and a willingness to hold individuals or hold entities accountable when that failure or that breach happens. You can go down a number of different sort of paths on what that looks like, but at the end of the day, we have international standards that must be upheld, and if you fail to meet those standards, there needs to be accountability.
In terms of rule of law, especially in the maritime area, I would like to think about what needs to happen. So nation and other actors are subject to different treaties and other rules, international rules, and but if they deviate from that, then that is a undesirable situation. We need to remove this type of situations. And in other words, the attempt to change the status quo by force is something that we need to change. Unfortunately, there are many attempts to change the status quo by force. If we look around this world, it really is hard for just one nation to control the situation. So, the importance of rule of law is something that needs to be really shared as a shared recognition among the like-minded countries, and if this type of attempt to change the status quo by force, this kind of consequence will happen. This is the sort of the formula that we need to present, and this is something that we need to present to the world.
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, that rounds out our time, but I'd like to please thank our distinguished guests for a really excellent first panel to kickstart the conversation. Admiral Ishii, Rear Admiral Arguin, thank you very much. Now over to you, Professor Calder, for...
So with that, we will have about a 10-minute coffee break, and then back to the second panel.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks very much. Sir, thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes.
Thank you. They gain back all the time, but now we've given it, started frittering it away. They certainly squeezed us up.
I know.
Just in each other's laps. Well, I enjoyed your comments. Yeah. Center around which the Navy is built. Yeah. Don't worry, replicators can solve it. Right. Drown them in drones. That's going to save time. Yeah, 98 to 300. Yeah, in the last 20 years. I heard that too, and I marked that down. I mean, there you get all these private the flags and beans and China. That's the hardest thing, I think.
Yeah.
Being careful about time. We could possibly have a similar issue. I have a really hard stop, I think, as you know.
That's fine.
And at 6, but I guess there is a little bit of slack in the U.S.
Well, you let me know.
Yeah, I think we'll need to. We've really got to hold. We got to hold to the 6 o'clock.
That's fine.
I don't have much more to say. 3 minutes they put in there for it. That should be all right.
Okay.
You can give me 3 to 5 minutes.
Right. Sure. That's fine.
Okay. Yeah, that's the only thing. And people, I wish that we'd build in more time for this early stuff. Yeah.
Get it?
I just wanted to say too, I was delighted that you're here.
Thanks for including me.
We delighted. I love your book.
Thanks very much.
I've cited it. I have a book coming out in about 10 days.
Oh, congratulations. Well, and I also have, we can talk later, I have a book coming out probably next year on Japan as maritime great power.
Great.
That's the argument.
Fantastic. Delighted to hear it. Can you pull the paper right off the top of my desk? Okay. I know that we've got a lot of discussions going, and to me that is a real indication of the success of our conference so far. We unfortunately also do have a tight timeline, unfortunately, and so we'll be moving now into the second panel, which is concerning ensuring the safety of the sea lanes and the future of the maritime industry, more from the explicitly economical point of view. So I'd like to turn the time over again to you, Dr. Gresh, to introduce the panelists and lead the discussion. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much. It's great to be back here for another round of what is, again, a distinguished panel. First, I have Mr. Koichiro Hayashi, the General Manager of the Research Group NYK Line, Mr. Henry Nuzum, President of Waterman Logistics, Rear Admiral Ancy Phillips, retired, the Administrator of the Department of Transportation's Maritime Administration, and Vice Minister Yoshimichi Terada, who's the Vice Minister for International Affairs at the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism. The first two speakers, Mr. Hayashi and Mr. Nuzum, will each speak for around 5-6 minutes or so, and then I'll ask Administrator Phillips and Vice Minister Terada to add some perhaps additional comments related to the presentations. Then I'll have a couple of questions. There are also some questions that were submitted online, and then hopefully we might have a couple minutes at the end to open up to questions from the audience. So that being said, Mr. Hayashi, the floor is yours.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. Yes, my presentation here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Koichiro Hayashi, Research Manager at NYK Line, a Japanese shipping company. Today, I'll present some views on supply chain security from the perspective of the maritime industry shipping company. I'm so excited to discuss this topic with my esteemed colleagues. Let's begin by examining China's growing influence in the maritime sector. As you can see, the bottom two chart, China controls a significant share of global shipbuilding on right side and vessel ownership on left side. China is the second largest ship owners and the far biggest shipbuilders in the world. In terms of trade volumes, China's presence seems to be limited as for trunk line container trade. But when you see other maritime sectors, such as intra-Asia container trade, bulk carriers, and tankers, Chinese presence will increase. This dominance has raised concern, particularly the possibility that China could leverage its maritime power as a geopolitical tool. However, it is important to note that Western nations also, and especially in Europe, still maintain strong influence through maritime services such as marine insurance. The global shipping industry has demonstrated remarkable resilience in the face of geopolitical risks. For example, when both the Suez and Panama canals experienced disruptions from late last year to early this year, though container freight rates did increase. But apart from some initial confusion, shippers were still able to transport their containers. Also, even sanctions on Russian oil export did not significantly hinder Russia's export volume. This resilience demonstrates that the shipping industry can adapt and continue to operate effectively despite external geopolitical pressures. This resilience of the shipping industry comes from its nature as a unified global market with consistent rules. Shipping companies, regardless of their location, are driven by the same objectives: profit and efficiency. This allows capacities to be effectively relocated when geopolitical events disrupt normal operations. However, if this global market
しかし、この世界市場が分断されれば、例えば運賃の乱高下があったり、安全性への懸念というものが生まれます。そして、脱炭素化への取り組みが低下してしまうということもあります。加えまして、西洋の影響力の低下にもつながりかねません。
Now, let's focus on China's positions within this global shipping market. Interestingly, a major and influential Chinese shipping companies, which is more tightly involved in the global shipping market, such as COSCO, generally support a unified global market. In fact, sanctions imposed by Western countries against nations like Russia and Iran are currently undermining the unified nature of the global shipping market. due to China's substantial presence, it is impossible to contain its presence, even if the West tried to use leverage maritime services such as marine insurance. Therefore, the West should not attempt to use shipping as a weapon, but instead focus on deterring China from doing so. For that purpose, the key is to promote the benefit of a unified market nature with unified rules in areas such as maritime safety and decarbonization. Support from emerging economies is essential in this endeavor. However, effective deterrence requires ensuring that attempts at weaponization do not have the intended effect. In other words, it is crucial to maintain the maritime capability necessary for survival of the Western countries. This requires collaboration among Western countries, such as US, Japan, Europe, South Korea, and other nations. And the key to do so is to protect private companies' effort, private shipping companies' effort from economic nationalism of each country. Finally, let's discuss the supply chains we need to protect outside of shipping sector. During the Cold War, the focus was on securing energy such as oil or natural gas, and to a less extent, food supplies. But today, containerized goods are equally important for survival of Western countries, and China plays a central role in supplying many of these containerized goods, directly or indirectly. So, this factor should be considered when developing strategies for a secure supply chain. This is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Mr. Zoom.
Thank you to Shukuri-san and JITTI for inviting me to attend. I'm honored to share the symposium with Ambassador Yamada, Administrator Phillips, Admiral Edwin, and the other esteemed guests. It brings me great pleasure to be on the panel with NYK, a global shipping leader with whom Waterman has partnered for 4 decades. I'm also so pleased to be back at SAIS, where I received my master's degree. China has significant maritime advantages should war break out in the Western Pacific with the United States, and China will be more likely to succeed the longer the war endures. Let's consider the balance of manufacturing and maritime power between the U.S. and Communist China using World War II to illuminate today. In several ways, China today is in a stronger position than the United States was in 1940, and the U.S. today is in a weaker position than Japan or Germany in 1940. We have a strong military but insufficient manufacturing capacity to sustain a long war. Let's first look at today's balance of power between the U.S. and China. Although the U.S. economy is bigger, China's economy is based on the history's largest and most sophisticated industrial base. Its manufacturing output is 5 to 10 times that of the U.S. Despite all the advances in our cyber era, war remains an industrial struggle, and we've fallen far behind. As we examine shipping, the Gulf becomes truly alarming. China enjoys anywhere from a 40-to-1 to 100-to-1 advantage over the U.S. in terms of large commercial ships, depending on how you compare the fleets. China's shipbuilding advantage over the United States is mind-boggling. The Office of Naval Intelligence estimates that China has 230 times the shipbuilding capacity of the U.S. Let's consider these same lenses during World War II, manufacturing and sea power. Leading into World War II, U.S. had approximately 40% of the globe's manufacturing capacity, similar to China's 32% today. The Allies together produced nearly 3 times as much steel as the Axis. Today, China produces half the world's steel and 5 times the U.S. and Japan combined. In 1939, the Allies had an approximate 3-to-1 advantage over the Axis in size of combined merchant fleet. Today, China dwarfs the U.S. Focusing on the most relevant manufacturing sector, shipyards, the U.S. had the greatest capacity prior to the war and expanded it rapidly during World War II. The U.S. launched 15 times the number of merchants as Japan during the war. In contrast, China's advantage in yard capacity today is even greater than that of the U.S. in the 40s. What did these pre-war advantages, which only grew during the war, portend for the U.S. and allies? Despite the large lead the Allies had in merchant shipping at the beginning of the war, Germany realized that its U-boats might sever England from its colonies in the U.S. In 40 and 41, Germany sunk substantially more tonnage than the Allies built. In 42, new buildings and sinkings were nearly even. From 43 to 45, Allied new builds, combined with better air cover and escorts, overwhelmed the U-boats. In contrast, the U.S. submarine fleet succeeded against Japan. After a slow start in 42, U.S. subs sunk 6 times the amount of merchants in 44, starving Japan of imports, meaning it can no longer replace lost ships. The Imperial Navy had so little fuel that it had to severely limit its operations. In both the Atlantic and the Pacific theaters, Allied manufacturing might, and especially American, eventually swamped the early stunning conquests by the Axis, with the tide really reversing in 1943. Sealift saved England and transformed it into a bastion from which we supplied Russia, bombed Germany, and liberated Europe. In contrast, Japan's economy withered by 1944 due to its inability to protect its sealift. Let's turn back to today. War always lasts longer than optimistic belligerents imagine, with merchant fleets inevitably ferrying raw materials to arsenals on the home front and weapons to the theater. Eventually, each power, the U.S. much sooner than China, must replace sunken tonnage dependent on shipyards. But China enjoys a much greater advantage in merchant shipping than the Allies in World War II. This gap is exacerbated by Pacific geography, as a diminutive U.S. fleet must cover thousands of miles and a massive Chinese fleet only a few hundred. Even in wartime overdrive, U.S. yards might only muster 1 to 2 dozen new merchants per year, while China can produce over 1,000. Unless we change, a shooting war will cripple our sea lift and strand our deployed Pacific forces. In contrast, China could easily replace several hundred merchants per year, matching the rate of Allied losses to the German Navy in World War II. Of course, the Chinese shipyard overmatch means that it will be able to replace a couple hundred naval combatants annually, while the U.S. will struggle to build a few dozen. The U.S. is a teetering sea power, a strong navy concealing a rickety foundation, and woefully unprepared for a long war with China. While we must dramatically increase the American merchant fleet and yard capacity, the Gulf with China is so vast that the only hope to promptly narrow this gap is an industrial merchant marine and shipbuilding policy with Japan and or South Korea, whose robust combined yard capacity is over half of China's and whose merchant fleets are much larger than ours. Imagine AUKUS, but for shipyards and merchant shipping and at a much greater scale. Through such a program, we could, within a few years, produce several dozen merchants a year, primarily in our ally yards, but gradually shifting to American yards as domestic capacity increases. These ships would be U.S. flagged and U.S. crewed to ensure a much larger commercial fleet of steadfast loyalty. We might reach 500 to 1,000 merchants in less than a decade, substantially increase our yard capacity, and forge relationships to harness the large industries of Japan and Korea, offering potential wartime capacity close to that of China. The annual cost would be less than 1% of our defense budget. That concludes my comments. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Perhaps now I invite Administrator Phillips for your additional comments or remarks.
Thank you. So we are talking about China. We had an interesting conversation about this earlier. I think I will just mention a few things to set a stage here, and it will certainly capitalize on some of what Henry has said to us a few minutes ago. So under the Merchant Marine Act of 1936, which we tend to view as the Magna Carta of maritime policy in this country and law, a specific phrasing exists that says that a substantial part of U.S. international commerce, and I am paraphrasing, and domestic commerce will be carried by vessels manufactured in the U.S., manned by U.S. mariners, and owned by U.S. companies, in essence. We are there with the domestic under the Jones Act. I was just speaking about Jones Act at the break, briefly. But for our U.S. international, U.S.-owned, U.S.-flagged, U.S.-manned, internationally trading, commercially operated vessels, less than 2% of our commerce is carried in that way. So that is hardly a substantial part. It is closer to Mr. Newsom's description of diminutive. I haven't heard that used before, but it applies in this case. So that is where we are, ladies and gentlemen, and the fleet that we have is essentially what our authorities and appropriations authorize us to have, and it is largely focused on Department of Defense needs. So this challenge for us as a nation is how to expand our economic security, which is part of MARAD's role to foster, promote, and develop the maritime industry to ensure our nation's national security and economic security needs are met. How to expand that economic security piece if we want to make a difference. Many of you have probably heard our Secretary of the Navy, Carlos Del Toro, who's a colleague of mine from my Navy days, discuss his Maritime Statecraft initiative. Many of his ideas and concepts, I would say, have some at least bearing on some of the things Mr. Newsom has suggested. We may address them in some of the questions. And I would also say that the Maritime Administration is now deeply engaged in crafting a maritime strategy, which we have been directed to do by Congress to address some of these challenges. And we're just yesterday meeting with our fellow entities and agencies that are involved in this process and having this exact conversation about the economic security piece and what that means. So we can talk more about the challenges we are up against, the support of China's shipbuilding as state-owned enterprises, and the vast mismatch that we are dealing with a piece at a time. But I think you should just to set the stage for where we are in the U.S. in this context, I offer just a few brief additional remarks. So thank you very much, and I will yield the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. Just allow me to speak one thing. Mr. Hayashi and Nuzumu and Ms. Phillips, as they mentioned, the maritime global single market, so single global market in international shipping. And on the other hand, there is the importance of the economic security. So how to keep a balance between these two is quite important. But in terms of the economic security, this is something that we must not undermine. So we do need to really balance and see both of them as important. And then we need to reduce the concerns. And this is from both sides. I think we are really at that timing. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I wonder if we could first drill down. Each of you mentioned in part the role of economic security. So I'm wondering if, as we know in Japan, they passed in 2022 the economic security law. So I'd be curious to see kind of your thoughts and thinking. It's been about 2 years. How successful has that been, and what more needs to be done? And then to my American colleagues, Mr. Zoom and Administrator Phillips, you mentioned as well that the United States is thinking more and more about that. What are the areas that really need emphasis and prioritization in the here and now? So we can go down the line, Mr. Hayashi and Mr. Nuzum, and so on and so forth.
what is the question for me?
So the economic security law that Japan passed in 2022, how do you view that in terms of its success, but also what more does Japan need to be thinking about in terms of economic security? What are there elements or components that are still missing from that 2022 law?
Okay, I think the economic security law in 2022 have not impacted Japanese international shipping company strongly. So maybe in order to expand some the economic securities, as I explained in my presentation, we need to, how do I say, we need to discuss international collaboration framework. Because basically international shipping is carried by private company, private sectors, and so the collaboration among private company is a key for that purpose. Of course, every country has economic nationalism, which is closely related to the how do I say economic security sentiment. But if we want to build some kind of capability through international collaboration, I think the collaboration framework is required, and that framework have to some extent prevent from the direct interruption from national economic nationalism.
Thanks very much.
I think it's how does this 2022 economic security law in Japan impact cooperation?
You could go there, sure.
I'm not familiar with the law in particular, but Japan is our most important global ally due to its location, the size of its economy, its military might, shared values, and shared history. And as I alluded to in my comments, it remains a great sea power because of its current fleet and its manufacturing capacity. Anecdotally, I can compare the company I run with the company Hayashi-san works for. Waterman has 10 vessels trading internationally. NYK has 750. NYK's fleet, one Japanese company, albeit NYK's, I believe, the second largest shipping company in the world behind Maersk, is several times as large as the entire U.S. flag international trading fleet. So we could not ask for, the circumstances are ideal for deeper maritime cooperation to kickstart our own industry and our own fleet. And I really think the AUKUS model with the UK and the US and Australia and building nuclear submarines is a good model, but it can be much faster and it should be much easier to attain because the technology is simpler and we're dealing with conventional powered ships.
Thanks very much, Administrator Phillips. And perhaps, part of the question too is very much not necessarily, certainly for our Japanese colleagues, the economic security law of 2022, but I'm curious too about the US perspective related to our own economic security, what the thinking is there, and what the emphasis and prioritization needs to be from, for example, the Maritime Administration.
So remember, I'm the foster, promote, and develop, and not regulatory agency. And I would say the biggest challenge with the economic economic security is, what does that mean? What is the definition? What are we working towards? What outcome would we like to see there? And particularly when you're talking about a maritime industry that can support those needs and fully encompassing shipbuilding, ship maintenance, ship repair, all the mariners that go with it, all the ancillary supporting functions and other businesses that would be needed to do all that, plus shippers and carriers. What does that look like? And that, I think, gets to the challenge. And then what is the incentive to go there, which is even a bigger challenge. And I would add, kind of touching back to diplomacy, a number of the presentations today have talked about partnerships in Asia between nations, between like-minded nations, between nations with common goals, put together in such a way that business continues and maritime order continues, but that because of the collaborative nature of these businesses, they're able to present a more united front. And I think that is a tremendous opportunity that we should seize this moment to delve more into as a part of the broader discussion. So, thank you.
Thanks very much. Vice Minister.
Thank you very much. So regarding the 2022 Economic Security Act of Japan, I can mention a few things about this one. So of course in Japan, prior to the enactment of this law, also economic security had been an of interest of ours. And then, however, that kind of efforts had been quite unofficial. So it's really nice that we do have the law written and also enacted. And then, so in the past, we were somewhat vulnerable to risks in terms of economic security. And so, of course, that infrastructure, energy, utility, water, and also airports, those are considered essential infrastructure of Japan. So we have identified 20 critical infrastructure pieces. And then so under this law, we have the renewed commitment to protect those pieces of infrastructure. And so we do have a system to coordinate with the private sector so that they can notify some kind of risks so that we can provide checks and also monitoring to work together with them. So these are critical infrastructure domains are quite limited, and then also our provision of checks may be a little bit limited. However, so economic security discussions are still ongoing, and we have expanded the act. And so when it comes to freight going through ports, so this aspect has been now identified as a critical infrastructure in Japan. And so let's say there's a cyber attack. We actually experienced this at the port of Nagoya. So port of Nagoya was disrupted for 3 days. And then so at that time, we didn't identify freight going through ports. We didn't identify that as the critical vulnerability under cybersecurity domain. And then so now we revisited that, and then now we have been working to enhance and also expand our 2022 economic security law as well.
Thanks very much. You mentioned the cyber piece. I wonder if we could talk briefly about the role of emerging technologies, artificial intelligence. Perhaps Mr. Hayashi, Mr. Nizum, since you're in the logistics and supply chain, certainly business, to talk a little bit about what you're doing, what you're seeing, what's being incorporated currently. Are there new types of models that are being adopted? So if you could speak to the new kind of emerging technologies and how they're changing or influencing, shipping today.
Okay. As for the international shipping, I'd like to comment on 2 areas. One is zero emission propulsion of the commercial ships, and the other is the autonomous ships. The first one, the zero emission fuel propulsion fuels. We are keeping a close eye on the supply of these fuels for ships because Chinese companies are making significant investments in fuels like methanol and ammonia. These efforts are not be as visible as their Western counterpart because these Chinese companies made less proactive information disclosure. However, if their investment will succeed, they could gain a very high market share and very high cost competitiveness, just like in other climate change mitigation sectors, such as PV panels, wind turbines, and electric vehicles. And as for autonomous ship operations, when we consider the state of international shipping in coming 10 years or something, I believe that the impact will be limited. Autonomous technology at that time frame will primarily be used to reduce workload of seamen and prevent human errors on manned vessels rather than fully autonomous operations. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. So regarding cyber, it is a threat. My recollection is that NotPetya, 10 years ago, one of the primary victims was Maersk. That substantial cyber attack, I think it originated in Iran, maybe 2014, I can't remember exactly when. We at Waterman are certainly aware of the threat in cyber, and there's a compliance regime with the government that we have to comply with to harden ourselves. You know, you're always one step behind, I think, the offense in this game. AI, it's certainly out there. You see offers of how AI can transform your business. I don't know that it has really had a dramatic impact other than offering to finish my sentences in Gmail. But it's, I think on the commercial shipping side, we've seen a gradual demanning, if we look at automation of our ships over the past several decades. Whether we actually ever get to autonomous, I think is kind of beside the point. So our vessels are, including the 2 new builds we just built in Japan over the last 9 months, they can carry, each of them, a single vessel can carry 7,000 automobiles or 300 M1 Abrams tanks and 18,000 tons of cargo, 656 feet long. They're manned by, or crewed, because they're men and women on our crew, by 21 mariners, right? So if you went back 50 years, that would probably be over 100. So that will continue, whether we ever reach full autonomy is sort of beside the point. There's a continual demanning of ships, which makes things more efficient. And ideally, we actually, despite that, I don't want to send the wrong signal. The United States has a huge shortage of mariners because we have a tough time, even at these very efficient manning levels, manning the ships we have. And the fleet, although I believe is past its nadir, thanks to the programs of Tanker Security Program, Cable Security Program at MARAD, and has grown by about 8 or 10 ships, and hopefully will be, with some legislation out there that's authorized but not yet appropriated, will continue to grow. So even at these efficient levels, we do need many more mariners for more ships.
Thanks very much. I wonder if we could turn now to the idea or the supply chains. So to Administrator Phillips, as well as Vice Minister Terada, I wonder if you could speak first and foremost, where in your eyes, from a government standpoint, are some of the more vulnerable sectors of the supply chain? And then furthermore, what are the U.S. government or the Japanese government, respectively, doing to strengthen some of those supply chain vulnerabilities?
Okay, I'll jump in. So from a sector perspective, certainly post-COVID, broadly across the government, but certainly within the Department of Transportation, where we started with a supply chain envoy, port envoy, John Picari, who led the charge during COVID to try to unravel the challenges we're experiencing in our ports and the broader supply chain that also went with that, which then moved to a supply chain envoy, General Steve Lyons, former Transcom, who looked more broadly across the supply chain to try to continue to expand opportunities to smooth the flow of commerce broadly across all modes. And then now to the Office of Freight within the Department of Transportation, who continues to work across carriers, shippers, and across, again, all modes to understand how we can continue to improve our supply chain focus and traffic movement. They have developed their own process, software, system to flow the flight logistics voluntary participation entity at this point in time, takes anonymized data and then uses it to understand future trends. They are beginning to expand their ability to look into the future. It was first quite brief, 30 days or so ahead, but again, and continuing to expand participation as well to give us some better idea of what's happening there. Will there be a future in AI in this kind of work? Perhaps, certainly. But what we learned in COVID was that just in time wasn't really working, and as any disruption occurred in our supply chain, the entire rest of it began to fall apart. And a lot of it was the ability to draw cargo through rather than just unload at ports. That said, one of the things that has been neglected the longest from the transportation perspective in this country is ports. Mostly because they are not under the auspices of the federal government, other than for safety with the Coast Guard. They are owned and operated by states, first and foremost, and by other entities within states or other political subdivisions of a state government, or privately owned. So I know my Korean colleagues were shocked to learn that I had no authority over ports. I provide grants to them and provide additional capacity opportunities, but we do manage that very differently here. And so the ability to even provide for additional supply chain resilience through port infrastructure grants and port infrastructure development is a fairly substantive change, particularly with the additional funding we got under the bipartisan infrastructure law. But really, that grant program only started in 2019, 2020. So we have an interesting process to go through there. We are seeing change, but it's going to take some time. And the fact that we're kind of doing it in however many states and localities, different ways, adds to the challenge, but also adds to the creativity and opportunities there. So, so for us, from my perspective, ports are the thing that where we need to spend a lot of time. But with that, the entire supply chain broadly is, we continue to need to communicate better there. And I think COVID was a wake-up call for us that we had work to do.
Thank you very much. Mr. Terada.
Hi.
Yes, in Japan, the supply chain itself to do something or to provide any, say, subsidy or something like that, there is really no such thing. But in terms of ports, there, to have certain budget allocation or to have initiatives for training and other personnel. And then these are done. And then with vessels, there is certain tax systems. Aside from the tonnage tax system, there are other tax systems that are being introduced. So these are the ways that the supply chains are being strengthened in Japan. That is our current situation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move now. There are a couple of questions we received online. First to Mr. Hayashi, Mr. Nazum. Given the increasing geopolitical tensions and potential fragmentation of the global maritime market, How is the private sector preparing to ensure the resilience of its operations, particularly in the event of disruptions to key shipping lanes or supply chains? What strategies are being implemented to maintain secure and stabilize transportation capacity in such scenarios?
Okay, that is question. That is very good question. And from the perspective of the private shipping company, the question may be answered in my presentation. In specific, if a specific shipping lane became available, vessels will avoid these areas. And this will lead to tighter capacity and resulting in a surge in freight rates. Some shipping companies that can navigate those lanes for some reasons, some political or other reasons, that these companies can take a shortcut amid the skyrocketing freight rates, allowing them to earn a premium. And other shipping companies will use the shipping route, not using that shipping, that conflict zone. But as I explained, for Panama and Suez Canal case, that would have a catastrophic impact for the international shipping, but the international shipping was successful to provide sustainable service during that service disruption. And this is the for shipping service perspective. And in terms of disruptions to supply chains for other shipping services than shipping itself, shipping companies are trying to mitigate risks by diversifying their procurement. These companies are looking to spread out their sourcing to reduce their vulnerabilities to any single point of failure.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. So, look, this is already happening, the fragmentation of the global maritime market. You know, a primitive militia, the Houthis, have significantly constrained transit through the Red Sea and the Bab el-Mandeb, which has interrupted a general trend of the past few decades, which is a much more horizontally integrated global shipping industry where, like many heavy industry products and services, many countries have allowed their, including the United States, allowed their own potential to atrophy as they seek the most efficient, lowest cost alternative. That works well in peacetime for efficiency, for low cost, for lowering consumer costs, for constraining inflation. It does not work well in times of disruption like COVID or, God forbid, a war, when sovereignty and the people and states that control the tonnage and that have come to dominate the tonnage may decide they don't want to give you any more access. And so you're isolated and stranded, which is particularly important for a country like the United States, which has so much trade across the two oceans. So I think, you know, it's hard to reverse this, but there are some from an American perspective, we have to reverse what we have done and adopt a policy such as that of Japan, which is to maintain a strong merchant marine and shipbuilding base so that we have a level of autonomy. It will cost something, but it actually is a mere fraction. Probably we could quadruple, quintuple our merchant marine with probably adding 1% to the defense budget, which is under $10 billion a year.
Thanks very much. I have a second two-part question for Mr. Terada and Administrator Phillips. Coming from online, what is the single most critical infrastructure that must be developed and delivered to secure capacity growth and supply chain security? And the second part of that is recent maritime domains have been drastically changing in terms of space domain integration, looming overall cargo volume due to further global growth, national sovereign claim issues in the South China Sea, malfunctions in important international canals, etc. Which organization should take the lead in this initiative, and how can they do it? Very easy question, to say the least.
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you. So in terms of the first question, of course, the critical infrastructure such as ports and vessels themselves, it really depends on the definition of the infrastructure, but it really is the seafarers, the people who we need to protect. It is really hard to really put an order in which what is the most important, but what I want to really pay attention to is the shipbuilding. The shipbuilding itself, their business, just like in Japan, but also China, South Korea, really are growing their business in this area.
So of course shipbuilding and then also maintenance and also repair. So although it should be distributed to among other many countries, not just solely rely on a few limited countries, so far it has been just an okay, has not been an issue, but there is a possibility that solely relying on only a few countries might be a big issue in the future. And also who is taking the lead in this shipping domain. I don't think we can pick one lead in this area because it is very difficult to address. So I think that that is why cooperation among countries and then also international organizations should take the lead so that we can work together. So we need to involve, for example, ship owners and also other stakeholders to work together as well. U.S., Japan, between the United States and Japan, we do have common or shared visions and also values. So not just a country-to-country conversation, but United States and Japan maybe can take the lead to engage with other countries so that more and more countries can engage in this shipping domain.
Thank you. Administrator Phillips, do you have anything to add?
Thank you. I do. I certainly agree with the people comment. I started with people deliberately because I think that ultimately it is an outcome that will lead us to success in many other ways. Certainly shipbuilding and port infrastructure as well. Shipbuilding, of course, including maintenance and repair, are critical. I would like to add cyber to that. While the domain of cyber control and regulation within our ports and waterways falls largely to Admiral Edwin and his team and the Coast Guard, there is much there that we do not yet know. We are vulnerable. This year in February of 2024, the Biden administration rolled out a series of cybersecurity initiatives, most of which provided additional capacity to the Coast Guard, regulatory authority, and other authorities. But then now they have to give them the capacity to do it, right? So, and then more broadly, we are all learning together of the many challenges in that realm, and many times we learn the hard way. So this is yet another domain that has to be understood, that our practitioner and our skill levels continue to increase, and that we get ahead of situations rather than reacting to them. And as for the international organizations and initiatives, wow, there are so many. So I defer to my international policy colleagues there, but certainly a collaborative approach will work best. We have seen IMO get engaged in many things. There are broader initiatives that are at stake, as we've discussed, and so without international collaboration among like-minded nations, to ensure maritime governance and fair treatment at sea, and and fair and best practices at sea, if we try to go it alone, we will not be successful. So I will leave you with that. Thank you.
Great. Well, we have a couple of minutes for maybe one question, two questions from the audience. The gentleman here, I think we have a microphone, or perhaps stand up and identify yourself, and please pose your question.
Dave Onsbach, no affiliation. You heard from Admiral Phillips about the Jones Act and how the American ship firms and shipping was really not very competitive in the international market and protected from competition in the domestic market for more than a century by this law. So I'm wondering, in Japan, do they have an equivalent law that requires shipping between Japanese ports to be in Japanese-made, owned, crewed, and flagged ships? Or does Japan also allow foreign competition, foreign ships, to carry goods between Japanese ports? Thank you. Yes, especially if they meet certain health, safety, environmental standards. Thank you.
Maybe there are some question.
Cabotage.
アメリカの船籍について日本
So are you talking about U.S. flagged ships to be maintained and also maybe repaired at the Japanese ports or shipyards? Is that your question?
No, I'm saying, do the ships that travel between Japanese ports, say for example, Sapporo to Nara or Kagoshima, do they have to be Japanese-made, owned, flagged, and crewed, similar to the Jones Act ships in the United States being American-made, owned, crewed, flagged between American ports?
Cabotage.
Foreign
Cabotage.
ships
the term.
allowed to take goods between Japanese ports?
日本のカボタージュ規制について、日本も
Are you asking about regulations on cabotage? So we do have the same or similar cabotage regulations like any other countries.
As Terada-san said, Japan has its cabotage system like Jones Act, but Japan is much smaller country than the US, so the domestic shipping is rather far separated from international shipping than the US is. So I mean, US has long haul domestic shipping like say Hawaii or to from Atlantic or to Pacific or something. So, but that's a different situation in Japan. Maybe that's how cabotage impact for both countries' shipping.
Fantastic. Well, unfortunately, we're out of time. I know we could continue the conversation longer. I know I certainly learned a lot today. Please join me in thanking our distinguished panelists for an enriching and enlightening discussion. And I'll welcome Professor Calder back to the main stage for some concluding remarks.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and also, of course, thanks to a tremendous panel and a lot of creative ideas here. We're not at the point where in 3 minutes we can really summarize what has been said, but just for the sake of a little bit of clarity, I thought it would be useful to take the theme of challenges and opportunities that have come through time and again from our from the very beginning and with Ambassador Yamada. We've said a lot about China. Its rising capabilities, more proactive behavior, particularly its manufacturing strengths and the way that those have also related to service sectors like shipping. a lot of this has been driven by the globalization and the deepening global interdependence that we've had since the collapse of the Berlin Wall and what looked like it was the waning of the Cold War. I was quite struck, I have to say, with a lot of what was said about technology and the way that technology has deepened the challenges that we have. Several people on the panel here and previously, of course, were talking about cyber, just as one case in point. And also we talked about automation, the demanning of vessels, and of course, the less human direct control and interaction we get, of course, the more critical those capabilities to automatically adjust become. And so naturally, cyber becomes one crucial, sort of a linchpin area of technology. Another theme that I thought was actually quite fresh on the challenges side is that of governance. And, we noted, for example, that U.S. ports are the responsibility of state governments and local governments, and not a federal government, and certainly not a federal government that was strategically oriented, as recently, of course, so clearly China has been, and for that matter, across the years, Japan, in a positive sense, often has been, with national government playing a key role in policy on some of these sectors that are strategically important. We have left that to different levels. On the geopolitical side, what really struck me was that the challenges in many ways are quite clear and quite stark, and they've become more dramatic to us, certainly, since the beginning of the Ukraine war. And also, of course, the war in Gaza, which has involved the Red Sea, for example, and the threats to shipping by the Houthis, and so on. So and not to mention the South China Sea, and although I think the South China Sea epitomizes another important point about the geopolitics, the challenges are pretty clear, but the solutions are not nearly as easy to achieve. And as we can see in the South China Sea, for example, the paramilitary capabilities or fishing boats or things that don't rise to the level of actual conflict, artificial islands or different sorts of developments that are short of the kind of military confrontations that would create a strong response. There's a certain ambiguity in terms of what we're capable or what we can easily do. So that leads me to the question of opportunities. And I must say there were several things that came through again and again and again that are almost verities. Let me take those first. But then, and what I wanted to conclude was several, I thought, rather creative ideas about, options for the future. All of us agree here, I think, that alliance cooperation is important, that there's a complementarity between Japan's formidable capabilities in terms of shipbuilding, the large size of some of the historically important shipping companies in Japan. Of course, they've merged and there's been transformations, but just thinking of one from Japan's early modernization, NYK, of course, was right at the spearhead of that. Alliance cooperation, we have, Japan and the U.S. have very different capabilities. But speaking as an American, I've long felt, and I believe Dr. Gresh and Dr. Newsom and all of our participants do appreciate the important capabilities in manufacturing, shipbuilding, shipping. We went down to maintenance, Kaizen improvements, marginal change, quality control, just a whole series of areas. And of course, given the importance of America's global role and also the revival of America's economic role that I suppose we will hear more of regardless of what happens. There'll be big changes following our election, but one thing that will be clear is that our economy and its revival will certainly be right at, and its manufacturing as well, will be right at the heart of that. So given those, the complementarities of the U.S. and Japan, alliance and cooperation, more systematic cooperation certainly is important. There's an element of strategy. I heard Hayashi-san, for example, telling us that, you know, if you consider China's capabilities in shipping and so on, rather than complicating things with the direct over-the-top initiatives, sometimes more indirectly trying to deter China's weaponization of certain areas where still China remains relatively market-oriented. I mean, there's a limit to where that goes, but you know, there's an issue of strategy in terms of what opportunities we pursue. But to conclude, there really are some areas that struck me as almost what we would call no-brainers. The Maritime Statescraft Initiative that, you know, has been initiated already. Secretary Del Toro has begun, as was mentioned. Ship repair. Some U.S. side developments in terms of American shipyards. Some of those things actually have begun. But it's not only in that area. I don't think we can forget one element that really struck me. It came again, and the Admiral again talked about global Coast Guard. Given some of the ambiguity, and there are many dimensions to this, there's the capacity building, and not only one organization. Maybe there are other analogs that we should think of, but the situation or the responses to challenges like the South China Sea do have in many ways their ambiguities. The difficulties in facing directly some of the real challenges. The capabilities that represent economic security, but are also either non-military or paramilitary or quasi-military. The Chinese, of course, have developed these things to a T. And some degree, greater degree of symmetry, no doubt, as well as the positive peace-building capabilities or just controls of, you know, illegal fishing or things like that that come about from capacity building. That, of course, was mentioned strongly, that the Coast Guard and other entities in both, and Japan has played really a key role. I was struck by this out in Palau. My wife and I are headed later in December for the South Pacific to look at some of these things as well. Given the ambiguities of the situation in the Indo-Pacific, of the responses, the challenges are clear. The role of entities like Global Coast Guard, it seems to me, are important. We mentioned AUKUS for shipyards in the merchant marine. I thought Mr. Newsom's thought, I was proud that he's a SAIS alum. And we do have other people like that. They're not only or all SAIS alums, but this is something that our strategic studies has been concerned about and has produced, I think, as people who think outside the box. The idea of an AUKUS for shipyards and merchant shipping, how do you go about doing this? Well, it's an idea. It's clearly we've said that something needs to be done. Almost everybody has agreed on to strengthen U.S. capabilities in key areas like shipping and shipbuilding. How do you go about it? AUKUS is probably one of the most important maritime initiatives that the United States has recently engaged in. Of course, Pillar 2 of AUKUS was mentioned, and Japan has been having important discussions with the U.S. As, Korea also is an element in some of these things. But maintaining a strong merchant marine, the global Coast Guard, maritime statescraft, and all of these things under the rubric of alliance cooperation. Those are some of the things that occurred to me. Of course, we have, as Dr. Gresh mentioned, we have an audience, an important, very important audience in Japan. And we're honored, of course, to be doing this together with JITTI. To our Japanese friends, the first thing, of course, would be to stress something that I think is almost atarimai, as they might say it, or, goes without saying, namely the crucial importance of the sea lanes themselves as a maritime nation. Throughout Japan's history, or its modern history, that's been a concern. And then the issue, the complementary, well, the critical moment that we face now with the rise of maritime competition, with the delicate situation that we face in the Indo-Pacific, the role, the transition period, and even geopolitically that we may be in. We've had leadership, we just had a leadership change in Japan. We will have a leadership change in the United States in only a matter of a few months. And a decision on that, of course, within just 1 month. So what does that mean, really, in conclusion? This is a momentous time. It means to me, and I believe this across my career, as I think many of us have, the importance of U.S.-Japan cooperation. The U.S. and Japan have deeply complementary sets of skills: creativity and precision, organization, and the ability to take important initiatives. Both of us have in our way. But these complementary skills means that we're stronger together. We have a critical moment, a difficult moment, a momentous time, but we're stronger together in facing it. So those are the conclusions that I take out of this extremely interesting symposium. Again, I just want to thank our partners in JITTI, and of course to a first-rate group of panelists and the insights that they've provided to us. I've enjoyed this a lot. I've learned a lot, as I think we all have. And so I'd like to join, I hope you can join me with a round of applause. Thank you. And then just one last thing, for those who are able to stay, everyone is warmly welcome to a reception on the first floor, right in the lobby of this beautiful new building. Thanks for coming.
Thanks very much. Congratulations.
Yeah, you
that was
did
a great event.
Yeah, it was. It really was. Good luck on your project.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you. I'll see you back in Japan. I think Jeff, I'm glad that he's doing work in that area too.
I am excited for your book. We'll have
Yeah.
to bring you over to NGU.
Oh,